Okay, so welcome to Vibe, everyone. We're in Moi Wo, we're on Lantau Island, and we're in Hong Kong. Today's today's presenter is Patricia O'Sullivan. Patricia's come over from the UK for a couple of weeks, and this is her first talk, and I'll let her introduce it from here. So, welcome, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Gary. It was pretty much a year ago that I was here before, and that was the first time I'd been here. And that time I gave you a talk called Murder on the Islands, and it was nice gory stories from this part of the world, dating from 100 years or so ago.
Yeah.
So today, what I'm going to do is tell you different stories, similar period, similar locale, but from the other point of view. So
Okay.
the talk is called All in a Day's Work.
Right. And we're in the sort of end of the 19th century, aren't
Very
we?
end of the 19th century and the beginning of the first 2-3 decades of the 20th century. And Gary has very kindly offered to be my interlocutor, so he's going to pop in with questions to me so that maybe I give you a bit more context.
Yeah.
So, off we go.
Okay.
Gary, audience, hello everybody. Can I take you back, please, 125 years ago to a time when Moi Wo had just become part of the newly enlarged Hong Kong. This little village had just a few houses. Well, I say houses, they weren't houses, they were huts. We can see from this map up here at the top. Now this is from 1952, this is 50 years later, and there's still basically only one brick-built building in Moi Wo. The rest are shanty. They are temporary huts and the like, and sheds.
And as you can see from the map, places like Luk Tay Tong back 70 years ago were called, Lung Ti Tong,
Yeah.
Tai Tay Tong, Tai Ti Tong, and Mang Tong, where I live,
Yeah.
is now Wang Tong.
It's always quite a challenge for me, who hasn't been all my life in Hong Kong, to work out when I read these old newspapers which place are they actually talking about. Yeah. So this is quite interesting. Anyhow, on Moi Wo in 1899, life was really quite a struggle. There was a bit of cultivation of the hills, they kept a few animals, but really the people got their livelihoods from the sea. The silver mine, that is this area gets its name from, had closed just a couple of years earlier. It used to employ a few people, not many, but round here it wasn't a safe place either. Piracy was really rampant in the whole of the area, and recently marauding gangs had started infesting the coast and taking what they could out of villages exactly like Moi Wo. So, like all the families in the little group of huts, Long Wai Hong had been fast asleep when he was wakened by blazing torches and realised that 3 men had come into his home. Before he had any time to arm himself, they'd started clearing it of anything that had any value. And when he and his family objected, they hit him with the blunt side of swords and threatened with worse. It was all over in a very few minutes, and the villagers could see the progress of the men with their still burning torches as they ran to the shore and then away on a couple of junks towards Lama. Long Wai Hong had lost his revolver and cartridges, his boots, his clothes, his money. Other huts had suffered in similar ways. There'd been gunfire, and in one home, 2 people were really seriously injured, an elderly man and a young woman of 19. They'd just become part of British Hong Kong. And wasn't there a police station on Chung Chau? I mean, that's where they had to go to pay their rents, for heaven's sake. They should go over to there and see if these men could do something about it. So that's what the men decided to do. So at first light the next day, Long in the lead, rode over to Chung Chau police station, and so it was that Inspector Gillies heard about the outrage. The villagers reckoned that the bandits had got away with $112 worth. They'd cleaned them out. They were poor people, they couldn't afford this. The loss to them was very great. The inspector then sent word to the Central Police Station at Hong Kong, which is the control centre, as it were. Now, this wasn't a matter of picking up a phone, because there were only telephones on Hong Kong Island at the time. And so a couple of constables had to get the launch out and sail over to Hong Kong Island and then go and give the message to the head of the force by hand.
Okay. Wow.
Go on now.
Yeah.
Yep. Henry May, who was the captain superintendent, the head of the force, he was very determined that policing this newly enlarged Hong Kong was not to be made more difficult by outlaws and brigands. And these people were really infesting the waters, as I say. He personally went into immediate action. He summoned two of his brightest young detectives, George Sim, who had been in the police force for 2 years, and Edmund O'Sullivan, who had 4 years' service. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of George Sim. I'm really sad about this because he really features in my whole family story, but there's one of Edmund.
So you mentioned there family stories.
Yes.
So, in fact, Edmund is a relative?
He is my grandfather's cousin.
Okay.
Yes, first cousin, yes.
Right.
Yes. So you'll hear more about them.
Yes, yeah, cool.
So anyhow, Sim and O'Sullivan had both been swiftly promoted to the rank of sergeants because mainly they had done very well in learning Cantonese and they'd passed higher exams in them. Together with a party of Chinese detectives and the Indian constables, they sailed to Chung Chau and heard the full report from the inspector and then also heard from the villagers who'd stayed on Chung Chau. The whole party then set off for Lama and for Yung Shao Wan. Now, then as now, Yung Shao Wan, do you know where I mean? Is that a recognisable name?
I don't, I mean...
If you go back a slide...
Yes, okay.
No, we haven't
two
got that
slides.
there. No. Yung Shao Wan, the largest town in Lama.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't really got Lama.
No, we haven't got Lama. We haven't got Lama there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of, well, people know.
Sorry,
Lama.
I should have... Can we stop? No, we keep going.
Yeah.
It's because I'm hoping that people will know what I'm talking about. Yes.
They will.
Okay, that's right. That's what I needed to know. It was the largest settlement then, but when I say largest settlement, in the whole of Lama had about 1,100 people on it.
Right.
So it's not big, and it was small enough for the detectives to go quite easily through a search of the village. But it had the reputation of being a hideout for criminal gangs, and the detectives had to proceed very cautiously, revolvers at the ready, in and out of huts, shacks, sheds, on the alert for hidden assailants as well as telltale contraband. Police had been attacked there in this village before, and later on that year 2 Indian constables would be severely shot whilst on patrol. But finally they were successful, and Sergeant Sim spotted a man running out of a house just as some Indian constables were going to search it. This man was carrying a revolver and cartridges, and so he was promptly arrested. A search of that house that he'd come from showed that it had been evacuated very swiftly, and a recently fired gun lay on the floor, together with most of the stolen property. But of the brigands, there was no sign. Where were they? I think we can carry on with this. That's right, that's that one. Whilst the police were still on Lama, the sergeant in charge of I should say. Whilst the police were still on Lama, his sergeants told him of the discovery of a large shed on the outskirts of Yongshawon. There appeared to be men hiding there. As the three men went to investigate further, more than 20 men scrambled out from the underneath of the raised floor. Lama was unknown territory for the police at this point, so rather than chase them through woods and scrubland on a fool's errand, May loudly instructed his men to leave the island and sail back to Hong Kong now. Job's done. The Moi Wo villagers were reunited with their property and departed to their homes. But of course, the chase wasn't over. Very late that same night, May took his sergeants and men.
Can we hold it just a sense? Someone's just come in. Just avoid that camera there. That's it. Oh, sorry. Didn't do that. No problem.
Very late that same night, May took his sergeants and men, a larger number this time, back to the village. Arriving at 2 a.m, they swarmed round the shed and pounced on the 21 men sleeping there. All were taken into custody. All then appeared before the magistrate later that morning, charged with being rogues and vagabonds. You heard of this?
That's some sort of term, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lovely term. Yes.
Manner of heinous crimes, I would imagine.
Absolutely. It's a very, very useful catch-all
Yes.
for the British government, British administration.
A sort of British understatement there, really, as well,
Yes,
isn't there?
Indeed, indeed. Each received a 14-day sentence of hard labour for that. It was almost a holding job, that, though, because the man who had been caught leaving the house earlier was charged with being involved in the robbery and put on remand, pending trial at the Supreme Court. And in the next few days, with the help of the villagers, the detectives were able to identify 3 of the other men as also involved in the Moi Wo attack. When the case came to the Supreme Court the next month, the men were found guilty of the outrage, were sent to jail to do hard labour for 7 years. Sim and O'Sullivan, together with the Chinese sergeant, all received commendations for their work and a reward of $10. Now, $10 might not sound very much, but the monthly salary of these sergeants was $60 a month. And remember that the Moi Wo residents had, the 5 huts had been cleaned out for $118.
Right, yes.
Values were rather different.
Yeah.
Now, yes, our young recruits. Early days for the men in the force was rather coming out from the UK or a few joining locally. Must have been quite a culture shock when they got here. As I say, they come out and they pose for their photos in best bib and tucker, and then I think quite often those lovely white suits didn't stay white for very long.
No.
The first decades of the 19th century, the practice was that the best way to first decades of the 19th century, first decades of the 20th century, they were using the practice of the 19th century that the best way of learning to become a policeman was to be a policeman.
Right.
So you learnt on the job. You went round with an experienced policeman.
So no specific trainings.
Well, there was language school.
Right.
Police school was almost exclusively at that point a language school. So the Indians learnt both Cantonese and English. Chinese learnt English, and the Europeans learnt Cantonese.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or with the option of learning Indian as well, Indian languages, yeah. But Cantonese was the important one for them. Yeah. And they all had to by this point. In terms of police procedure and law, they had manuals, and their station sergeant or their station inspector would be drilling them on those. Okay. So they'd literally be learning day by day. They all joined at the rank of constable, and although the Europeans who kept their noses clean could expect to be made up to lance sergeants before the end of their first 5-year term. Now, this is very much better than any police job they could get in the United Kingdom or in Ireland. In the Met, the London Metropolitan Police, for example, it might take 15 years for a man to progress from being a constable. In the Royal Irish Constabulary, 25 or even 30 years wasn't unknown. Right. So it was a good move for these young men.
Yes. Any idea on numbers, police force?
Yep, the number of the whole police force is about 800.
Okay.
Of which about 140 or so are Europeans. Okay. And then the other sort of 600 split between Chinese and Indians, with a slight balance in favour of the Indian contingent. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
They'd be barracked at the Central Police Station, what is now Daigun.
Okay. So Taekwon, that was the original main police station.
That's it.
Okay.
The building behind the administration block, the block that faces on to Hollywood Road, that the Hollywood Road block was built later on.
Right.
But the building behind that was the police barracks,
yes,
primarily, and the police station. Yeah.
And the magistrates' courts.
The magistrates' court at the side of that,
yeah,
yes, and then the jail behind that.
Yeah.
So it was all very usefully.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to travel far. Yeah. The majority were there. Some would be at Wan Chai or Yamate or Number 7 Police Station, which was in the Western. It's now the Western Police Station.
Right.
So some of the bigger, of the bigger ones. After a few years, they might join the fire brigade, which was an additional responsibility. You stayed being a policeman, but you did fire duty, and after hours, after your police duties, and then you were living at Number 5 station, which is Wellington Road, Queen's Road, if you know where that is.
Yeah, absolutely, we all do, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
A few of the Europeans were detailed to the water police, generally just a handful at this time, talking about 10 or so. Okay. They had their headquarters, of course, at what we think of now as 1888.
Right, yes.
Yeah? Which was the lovely new water police station had been built. But very, very often the men actually lived on the launches for considerable periods of time, months at a time or more.
It was a tough life.
It was a tough life, yeah. In the early decades, the police were more likely to get to the new territories or the islands on a special mission, like that which Edmund O'Sullivan and George Sim had gone on, rather than to find themselves stationed there. Little in the way of stations, there was very little in the way of stations in the early new territories.
Right.
They'd had to take over whatever building they could get. Later on you'll see the sort of decrepit Chung Shao station. So now, if you go on with this please, there, thank you. So my relation, Edmund O'Sullivan, I mentioned he is my grandfather's cousin. There on this screen you have my grandfather, Patrick O'Sullivan. I haven't unfortunately got a photo of him when he was a mere sergeant or constable, but I think he might have suppressed those. And then his brother, Mortimer O'Sullivan, Mortimer was shot in Gresson Street in 1918. And then there was another O'Sullivan who didn't, John O'Sullivan, and Thomas Francis O'Sullivan, 2 more O'Sullivans actually, who didn't stay in the force that long, stayed in 5 years, but both stayed in Hong Kong, stayed and worked in Hong Kong. So there was a whole gaggle of O'Sullivans at that time.
And were they related, the other two, or
yes, they were cousins. They were cousins. They were cousins on a different side, but yes. Early on in his 19-year career in the force, Edmund O'Sullivan, who we met first, did get some complex and dramatic cases. But his brother, my grandfather, Patrick, stayed on in the uniform branch and was kept very busy. Early days, in his time as a sergeant, he was in charge of Hung Hom, as we know it. but it's not Hung Hom as we know it. So, courtesy of, I've been filching from Gulo dreadfully, but these wonderful interactive maps where you can overlay and see what is Hung Hom. And then if you go to the next one.
Okay, so just on that map, basically the blue outlined area is the original area.
That's the original shoreline.
The original shoreline, and then the expanded area in reclaimed land was along TST and Yamete along the side.
That's right, that's right. And then the next one, it just zooms in a little bit. And you can see that's Hung Hom. It is tiny. You know, it's just 3 roads really. Yes, with the cement works behind it and docks, but it has more in common with the little villages on the New Territories than it does really to Hong Kong as on the island.
Yeah, which is amazing, really, isn't it? Because Hung Hom then latterly became the main route to China, to Guangzhou, and the shipyards were built along that sort of area as well. So.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Yeah. Small though it is, Hung Hom still managed to give him quite a lot of work to do. There were plenty of cases of theft, the appearance of many stolen goods on the streets. For example, Patrick arrested a man sitting on the dock beside sacks containing 1,600 pounds of sugar that he couldn't quite account for. The man got sent to jail for 14 days, unless he happened to have $100 on him. No, casual labourers don't have $100 in those days. People would steal anything that might yield a little money, and I mean anything. One of the most distasteful cases he was involved in was when a man reported that he'd lost a bag of rags. You know, he was a rag collector. When the rags were recovered, the bag was emptied out for the man to identify it, but it didn't even resemble cloth, and the stench from them made all the police gag. So yes, similarly unpleasant was the trade in fruit. Not nice, soft, fresh fruit. We
wouldn't know today.
Yeah, but fruit in last stages of decay. Peaches, pineapples, bananas. He'd found there was a woman who was 3 times he cautioned her about selling this, and on the third occasion he sent her to the magistrate, and she was fined. He also had to turn his hand to checking the boats over and inspection of the boats for the illegal opium or weapons that they might be concealing. On Hong Kong, I mean, the first jobs I'm talking about, the fruit and things like that, would be the realm of the sanitary inspector, and then the excise department would be checking out the boats. But he had to do everything really on a little village like this. Another serious crime was the rather bizarre kidnapping of a married woman. She was kidnapped by a couple that she knew well. Apparently they not only wanted to sell her to a brothel in Singapore, but also to rob her of all her jewellery. It seemed that the latter indignity was the one that worried the woman most, but she fought them off. But then the man slashed her, only missing her neck by a short distance. O'Sullivan was involved in bringing this to, the chase to capture the kidnappers, and then bringing them to justice and getting the woman off to the hospital.
And I think kidnapping was quite a common crime, wasn't it, in the 20s, the early turn of the century.
Absolutely.
Right up until the war, I guess.
Yes, it was very, very. There were so many kidnapping cases.
Yeah.
Most of the kidnapping cases involved children. Sometimes they'd be reported by their parents or the child's owner. Remembering we've still got Mujai at this point in
Right.
time, so children, especially girls, are owned by have been sold to other people.
Yeah, just explain Mujai,
Mujai.
for
Well,
those that don't
Yeah,
know.
well, it is the idea of little daughter, where a poor family will sell a child, or sell a daughter to a slightly more wealthy family, hopefully to be brought up as a daughter, a daughter who will be a dutiful daughter and look after the new adoptive parents. It was open to abuse, obviously, because very often the daughter was sold to the new parents, and then they either treated her more like a slave than a member of the family, or she would be sold into prostitution.
Yeah.
So, but there were always cases when the life of the Mujai was what it was meant to be in the best scenario.
Sense,
So,
yeah, okay.
yeah, it's a very grey area indeed. Sometimes it will be the adoptive parents that would be reporting, adoptive mother would be reporting the loss of the child, or sometimes the birth parents. Sometimes children were hidden in homes in Hong Kong. However, there were still quite a few brothels in the area. And Patrick used to reflect later on that one of his duties all the way through his police career was to pick up little bundles from the gullies and the bushes, which would be a little child, newly born child, very often a girl, sometimes dead, sometimes just about alive, and he a child of a woman living in the brothel who couldn't keep it, and he would take it to the convent over one of the convents on the island, and they'd do their best for it, for the little child. A detective's life, though, wasn't really the norm for most of the police. To move away from my own family and to quite a different type of policing, let me tell you part of the story of one young man that I've recently uncovered. Now, if you go on, I think, 2 steps, I'm skipping over that one, yeah. I'm going over to the story of Henry Arthur Council. Now, it's quite a long and involved story, so I'm going to just tell you the nub of the Hong Kong bit, just a couple of years of his Hong Kong story. He was born in Somerset in the west of England, but he went very early to Australia with his parents. When his parents died at the end of the century, he was born in 1877, when his parents died at the end of the century, he joined the American Army, fought in Cuba and the Philippines with the American Army. Then the American fleet took the troops up to China, up to northern China. They stopped for a short period in Hong Kong, and at that point, Henry Council decides to leave the army and see if he can maybe join the police. Now, I'm quite surprised to find that the police were prepared to accept a man who'd served in another nation's army. But I can only imagine, this is 1901 that he joined, and that's just when the new territories, as I say, have been enlarged, and they needed police like anything. They had to really enlarge the police force.
Yeah.
And this guy was a really expert swimmer. And so if he was prepared to serve in the water police, which tended to be an unpopular job, then he could have a job, it appeared. And serve he did. It's not often that a young constable gets to the notice of the newspapers in his first term, his first 5 years. This man got to the notice of the newspapers and the governor in within his first year. First of all, he was on a launch with his couple of Chinese constables, and they spotted a cinder boat. Do you know what I mean?
I don't, so just explain cinder boat.
Well, a cinder boat is the boat that takes the dead cinders from the steamers, because it's all coal-fired steamers at the time.
Right.
And it takes those cinders away. It's a refuse boat really,
Right, yeah.
and back to a point on the mainland.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't just throw them overboard?
No.
Well,
they especially didn't in terms of when they were in harbour.
Right.
They weren't allowed
No,
to do so in
of course.
harbour. I'm sure they probably had to when they're at sea
Out
for
at
weeks
sea.
and weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah. So he spotted the cinder boat, but instead of having cinders on it, it was loaded with coal, which was a bit strange. And it was also being sailed quite erratically. So he started chasing it. And there was 3 men on the cinder boat, and they realised that they were being followed. And so, having tried to dodge around and not succeeded in eluding him, they decided to try and scuttle the boat. That didn't work. So then, next try is to simply jump overboard. So at this point, counsel, the only thing to do is to jump overboard himself. 2 of the men were swimming towards the shore. One was swimming towards another junk that was there. So he couldn't do anything about the men swimming to shore. So as he was swimming, he blew his police whistle, 3 loud blasts, give assistance, give aid, that's the sign for give aid, and carried on swimming and caught up with the man who was swimming to the junk, and made a waterborne arrest, literally arrested him in the water. His launch then came up beside them, and he was able to take this man to the magistracy later that day.
Right.
And the magistrate, hello.
Hi, we're just doing a recording. If you just move from the camera, you can come in, and there's a bookshop at the back, and you can have a walk around, or you can sit and listen to the recording, which is.
Is it live?
Yes, it is.
That's right. That's okay. Keep going. Now, so the magistrate was very impressed by this arrest and said, "A very good arrest. I want it to be brought to the attention of the captain superintendent.
Okay.
He has done his duty and beyond." Well, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
36 hours later, there was a typhoon. It wasn't the very largest of typhoons, but it was a significant typhoon. Now, if you go to the next... so, he was actually looking after the Yamate. So the arrest had happened in Yamate Bay. And you can see it's very different from Yamate now. You can maybe see the public square street there. Just I'm pointing up above my head to the overhead screen here. That's right, and
okay, so it's in the sort of top right
that's it,
corner of the typhoon shelter of Yamate.
Yes,
on the waterfront.
Yeah. So as always, everything is much further inland nowadays. So he was during the typhoon. Of course, they didn't take the launches out, and he was patrolling the shore with his constable. They saw a boat, a couple of junks get into difficulties, and realised that they were going to have to see if they can do some rescue. So he sent his constable back to Yamate police station, which is just at the top of that picture, to get some more help, more aid.
Right.
and set out himself to try and help these poor people.
Right.
You can see the little pier, the little jetty. At the end of the little jetty, there was a sort of derrick which he was able to had a rope attached. He grabbed hold of the rope and then stepped over planks, flotsam and jetsam. You can imagine in a typhoon, everything is broken up. All of these craft have been battered to anything, into planks and things like this. So he stepped over the flotsam and jetsam and the trees, roots and all sorts of things until he could get to the people. He rescued 4 of them one by one, bringing them back individually up to the jetty, and then they climbed onto the jetty. But there was one young man who was further away and he couldn't get to him. And also this young man, just sort of late teens, that sort of age, 15, 16, he was obviously exhausted. They'd been trying to hold on for so long. And when council got to him, the young lad just collapsed, and he then, in getting to him, he lost hold of the rope. He then had to swim with this man on his back to the shore.
Oh. Wow.
For which he got the Belilius Award, the local Belilius Award for life-saving on water, and he was recommended by the governor himself for the Royal Humane Society life-saving medal, which he got, and was awarded to him at a big event in the Central Police Station.
And this was just a couple of days after he had already apprehended somebody at sea by swimming. Unbelievable, actually. So what a few days he had. I mean,
yes.
I think he merited his position in the Hong Kong police force.
He did. Sadly, there's more to his story I could go on, but I'll leave it there. Sadly, he died in 1910, aged 33. Yeah. How are we doing time-wise?
So we've got about 10 minutes, I understand. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There were a series of typhoons in the area in those first years of the century, and each time many police would have to turn out, guiding sampans to the shelters and rescuing distressed boat people, clearing the streets of passers-by and preventing opportunistic looting. The distasteful task of removing dead bodies on the shore would also be the job of the police. Of course, the worst one was in 1906, when there was a typhoon that resulted in the deaths of at least 15,000 people in Hong Kong.
That's pretty major.
Yeah.
I mean, the population of Hong Kong at that time would have been
so we're about 250,000.
About 250,000, so 15,000 of those perished during that typhoon.
That's right, yeah. I'm flipping through. I'm just going to end with a story that is still on the islands. It doesn't involve the police so much, but it's one of those stories that I think the police involved would have told their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren forever. It's a sort of feel-good story, and you whiz on a couple of because there we are. That's the one. The story is of little 7-year-old Oi San. Her birth parents had sold her when she was 6. Now, this is a little bit later. This is 1933, and there has been legislation about the Mui Jai. She'd been sold when she was 6, but now she'd been formally adopted, and she actually lived very happily with her new mum and dad. She lived in Shau Kei Wan. One day in September 1933, she went out to buy a bun for herself, and she was overtaken by a young woman who was a lodger at their house. This young woman took hold of Oi San and persuaded her to get on a tram. And the tram rattled on, and Oi San had never been here to this part of Hong Kong. Eventually, the woman sort of pulled her off and made her run down to the harbour, and the woman's mother was there, and she took hold of her and pushed her onto the Lama Island ferry. On Lama, they went to the older woman's house, where she was put to work, washing clothes, boiling up pig swill for the animals. And the older woman and her husband changed her name to Chan Tan. She was beaten by the man when she didn't work hard enough. The only bright spot in her life was that they gave her lots of tasty fruit to eat. She enjoyed that. She knew it wasn't right and she wanted to go back to her new mum and dad in Shau Kyi Wan. Back there, her mother was upset too and told the neighbour, the young woman who'd done the original kidnap, and about the loss of her daughter. And this woman put on a great act of feigning distress and actually cried with the mother over the girl's loss. But Hoi Satin was a bright little thing, and on the 29th of September, when she was supposed to be washing clothes, she managed to slip away unnoticed and ran to the police station. She marched boldly in and straight up to the British inspector, who towered over her. Really clearly, she told her story. Remember, she's only 7, you know. She was very soon happily restored to her parents, and the kidnappers, though, realising that the game was up, slipped back to Hong Kong Island, not to Shau Kyi Wan, but to a house in West Point, as far away as they could. They didn't manage to evade the detectives, who soon found the young woman and led them to the West Point house. Little Oi San had to stand in the witness box at the magistracy on a chair so that the magistrate could see her. And she gave her evidence so clearly and honestly there could be no question about the case. The young woman went to prison for 2 years with hard labour, and her parents each received a 1-term prison sentence.
Right.
So there's a nice little...
amazing, yeah.
I'm very...
Yeah.
Wonderful little doll.
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine it's rare for for those occasions to come with a good ending.
Yes.
You know, there must have been thousands of young children that were brought up in families that that had been kidnapped too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. So, just on that, you've you've written a couple of books on Hong Kong history. The first is about the Hong Kong policeman, which is based on
based on my family,
based
really.
on your family
history. Yes.
That's in a time around 1920, I think.
Well, it goes from 1864 to 1950. That's
right,
the
okay.
period at which my relatives and men from Newmarket in County Cork. All my relatives come from Newmarket in North County Cork.
Right.
And there was another family line, the Murphy-Lysett line, that also came from that tiny town. Again, it's a town of 1,000 people that produced just 20 Hong Kong policemen. Yeah. So yes, it's about all that group of men, and also the women and the families that came over here with them.
Yeah. So and the Gresham Street
Gresham Street siege. Yes, that features there, of course, because that's it was the sort of biggest event in police history in that period, that World War I period happening in Hong Kong. Yeah. It was just a month before the devastating fire at the racecourse, which caused so many deaths. But the Gresham Street siege, where 5 policemen were killed, including Mortimer O'Sullivan, was very, very significant.
And your other book, Women in the Magistrates' Courts.
Women, Crime in the Courts, 1841 to 1941. Yes, well, that is what it says on the cover. It is the story of women's involvement in crime in Hong Kong. Yeah. And so often that involvement in crime is about powerlessness and about poverty and trying to make ends meet and having a bit of autonomy for themselves in what was a very, very male-dominated world.
Society. And so, I mean, both of those books, I think, paint a very interesting social history of Hong Kong, which isn't necessarily available in other books. A lot of other books are really about certain, occasions and reported from quite a sort of clinical perspective. Your books are very much, about the
Yeah.
social times. How did it feel to live here?
Yeah.
How did it, was it a hard place to live?
Yeah.
The turn of the colony being created, and
Yeah.
it paints a wonderful picture.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, the second book, I mean, really came out because I'd written so much about police. And I thought, oh, what about the women? What about the
Yes.
women? And very quickly, it's not just the European women; it's the local women, it's the Chinese women and the Portuguese women. Yeah,
Yeah.
all of those lives.
When I say wonderful lives, they weren't wonderful lives. They were very tough lives.
They were tough lives.
But a very detailed history and well researched, amazingly researched. So,
Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to thank Patricia O'Sullivan for coming here today and to enlighten us a bit further, I think, on what life was like in those times and about her family and relatives. So, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.